Thank you for joining me for our 5th training video called How Can I Make a Difference Part 2. I'm Dr. Carrie Finley, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Center for Health and Safety Culture at Montana State University. Before working at the Center for Health and Safety Culture, I managed a behavioral health clinic serving individuals with mental health and substance use disorders. During that time, I experienced firsthand the impact stigma has on addressing these issues. This video, called How Can I Make a Difference Part 2, is the 5th in a series of 6 training videos. Other videos in the series include What is stigma? How does stigma impact us? Where does stigma come from? How Can I Make a Difference Part 1? And where do we go from here? Each video in this series is approximately 7 to 10 minutes long. We encourage you to review and discuss all 6 videos. There's a handout that goes along with each video. We encourage you to take notes and fill in the sections on the handout. Feel free to pause the video or repeat any section as needed. In today's training video, we're going to talk about attribution theory and specifically focus on the education, experiences, and practices and policies as ways that we can make a difference to reduce stigma. But before we do that, let's review what we've learned so far in training videos 1, 2, 3, and 4. We started this video series focused on defining stigma as a strong feeling of disapproval that most people in society have about something. We talked about how stigma can generate negative attitudes about people with a condition, and these negative attitudes can lead to discriminatory practices. We further defined stigma as a social process. That is, something that groups of people, often in power, create towards other people. It is a collection of attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and structures that interact at different levels of society, at the individual level, in groups, in organizations, and various public systems. Stigma is complex, and it can appear in several different ways. We explored 4 kinds of stigma: public stigma, self-stigma, courtesy stigma, and structural stigma. And we talked about the negative consequences that stigma can result in, like barriers to new relationships, lowered self-esteem, feelings of shame and guilt, a reduced sense of hope, just to name a few. We also started to dive into exploring why certain conditions get stigmatized and others don't, by looking at a variety of different factors that researchers have identified as contributors to stigma. Finally, in video 4, How Can I Make a Difference Part 1, we talked about labeling theory and how we can apply our understanding of labeling theory to make changes in our own language choices. The language and labels we use to describe people makes a difference. Choosing person-first language and avoiding describing people as problems or as their condition can help to reduce stigma. In today's video, we're going to explore another theory called attribution theory, and we'll continue to discuss ways to make a difference to reduce stigma. Attribution theory suggests that we attach meaning to other people's behaviors and to our own behaviors to arrive at an explanation. Attribution theory is concerned with how and why ordinary people explain events the way they do. For example, let's say you had to go to the bank, and while you were there, you came across a woman talking to a teller. She appears really upset. She looks angry. Attribution theory says that we're going to try to attach some sort of meaning to this person's behavior. Some of us might say, this woman is angry because she lacks self-control, or she has a bad temper. Others of us might say, well, she's angry because something bad must have happened. She was wronged in some way. The first explanation, that the woman lacks self-control or has a bad temper, assigns the cause of her behavior to some internal characteristic rather than to some outside event. This is called an internal attribution. Internal attributions assign meaning about a person's behavior to his or her personality, their motives, or their beliefs. In contrast, external attributions is the process of assigning the cause of behavior to some situation or an event that's outside of the person's control, rather than to some internal characteristic. In this example, we attribute this woman's anger in the bank to a bad experience or some situation that is outside of her control. Attribution theory suggests that greater stigma is seen when a person judges a condition to be a result of an internal attribution versus an external attribution that is outside of the person's control. When we think about the most commonly stigmatized conditions, mental health disorders, substance use disorders, perhaps this theory might give us some insight into the attributions we might be assigning to these conditions that can perpetuate stigma or attributions that can reduce it. Unfortunately, stigmas are slow to change, even when evidence no longer supports their underlying assumptions. An action we can take to reduce stigma is to learn more about an issue. Stigmas resist change because they are socially created, and we don't often question them. We begin to view our stereotypes and prejudice as the way things are. We don't challenge our views. We don't challenge our assumptions or judgments. And when we don't do that, when we don't challenge our social construction of reality, we can perpetuate stigma. Education is about learning new ideas. To specifically address stigma, education is about learning factual information about stigmatized conditions and correcting misinformation. It is about contradicting negative attitudes and beliefs, being willing to learn and share information, and to counter misinformation. New information can lead us on a journey to start to challenge our own assumptions. Numerous research studies show that education reduces stigma. Simply getting better informed can help us better understand the condition and understand why people with a condition may behave in certain ways. Which of these do you need to learn more about? Perhaps you need to learn more about the brain science of addiction, mental health disorders, the brain science of trauma, or medication-assisted treatment. I invite you to pause the video here and to write down your answers to this question. Which of these topics do you need to learn more about? Or if you're watching this video as a group, please pause the video and discuss this question in a small group. Another way we can reduce stigma is by engaging in more direct or even indirect experiences with people experiencing the condition. Experiences change our beliefs. We can put ourselves in a position to have intentional experiences. However, often because of stigma, we might be afraid to do this. The research suggests that people without a stigmatized condition often have very little meaningful contact with those that do have particular conditions. Lack of contact fosters distrust and fear. Experiences can overcome this divide between those with a stigmatized condition and those without. Positive interactions in person or online can change attitudes and reduce social distance. Research shows that contact-based programs have evidence of effectiveness for reducing stigma. Another way we can reduce stigma is to review and change policies and practices. Ask people that you're serving who have various conditions how the practices and policies that are in place in your organization might impede access to services, or their compliance with treatment, or their overall health and well-being. Sometimes we get so immersed in the work that we're doing that we don't ask the people that we're serving how certain practices and policies actually impact them. In today's session, we looked at attribution theory, and we continue to talk about ways we can make a difference. In part 1 of How Can I Make a Difference, we focused on language and labels and how the language and labels we might use can perpetuate or reduce stigma. Today, we identified 3 additional ways to reduce stigma. We talked about learning more about an issue, engaging and seeking out intentional experiences, and reviewing practices and policies. Before concluding this video, please take some time to think about the reflection questions that are listed on your handout that accompanies this video. What are some of the stigmatizing assumptions you are making that need to be challenged? What are some learning opportunities you are willing to seek out? What are some intentional experiences you can seek to reduce stigma? And for a moment, think about your organization and ask yourself, what practices and policies in your organization might be contributing to stigma? How could these practices or policies be changed? If you're watching this video as a group, we encourage you to engage in a discussion about these reflective questions. I also want to mention at the end of the training video is a bibliography list, which includes a variety of different publications that have been used to create this learning video. I encourage you to review the bibliography for additional reading opportunities. This 5th video in the Stigma Training series introduced you to attribution theory and talked about ways we can make a difference to reduce stigma. There are 6 videos in this series. Please join us for the final training video in this series called Where Do We Go From Here? In this final training video, we will briefly discuss the learning that's taken place in the previous videos by talking about what stigma is, how it shows up, why it matters, and the various ways we can make a difference to reduce stigma. We also will explore a call to action and invite you to create a personal plan to reduce stigma. Thank you for joining me today.